Okay, so now we are comparing fractional halves and quarters to tenths and hundredths on the number line. So if we look at this top number line here in green, it is divided into half. And then if we look at the bottom number line, it's divided into tenths. So what decimal does 1/2 equal? And if you look at the number lines and you compare them, you can clearly see that 1/2 and 0.5 share the same space on the number line, and they would be equivalent to each other. And which decimals would be less than 1/2 then? And so I want you to just pause and think about that to yourself. Which ones would be actually less than 1/2? Okay, so if we're looking at the number line, anything on the left-hand side here and going down would be less than 1/2. So starting at 0.49 and moving to the left. And then if we're thinking about what would be greater than 1/2, just pause the video and think about that for yourself. Okay, and the same thing, just starting right here and moving over to the right. If I'm only going to say tenths that are higher, I could say 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9. And if only tenths that are less than 0.4, 0.3, 0.2, 0.1, and definitely 0 would be less than. Okay, so moving along here, now the top one number line is divided into quarters, and the bottom one is divided into tenths. Okay, so I want you to decide on these numbers down the bottom here. So looking at 3/4 being compared to 1/2, and 1/2 on the top number line, of course, would be right there. Where does 3/4? 3/4, if we're looking at 3/4, compared to 0.1, 3/4 being way over here and 0.1 being way over here on the bottom number line, is 3/4 greater than or less than 0.1? So hopefully in your mind you said that it's greater than, and we can clearly see that when we compare the two number lines. If we are comparing 0.4 and 1/4, okay, 0.4 definitely is further along on the number line, and so then 0.4 is further to the right, and therefore it's larger. So 0.4 is greater than 1/4. Okay, looking at 0.8, so I'm going to mark that there, 0.8, and comparing it to, again, 3/4. If we follow this line down here, it's definitely further to the right, 0.8. So 0.8 is greater than 3/4. All right. Looking at these number lines, still divided into quarters, but they're hundredths on the bottom now. And I want you to point out that I have put tick marks in between 0.20 and 0.30 and 0.70 and 0.80 because we are going to be comparing these fractions to decimals. I could have put those in all along the whole way, but I just put them in for those parts just for where we were comparing. So if I am going to look at these and compare and try to figure out 1/4 is equal to what fraction, okay, just between 1 and 0, and I follow it down, and it would be equal to 0.25, which is funny because if we think of our money system, right, a quarter is 25 cents for a reason, because you would need 4 of those in order to make $1. So we would be divided into 4s here. If we're looking at 3/4 and we're following that down, okay, it would be 3/4 is equal to 0.75. and 1/2 still equals 50. 50 or 0.50, so 50 cents if I'm talking dollars. I also want to point out that this place here can also be represented if I'm writing in quarters, 2 quarters, because if I multiply the top by 2 and the bottom by 2, these are classified as equivalent fractions.